Can you really make a living running a cafe? I mean, can you earn enough that it's worth leaving your 9-to-5 job, taking the risk and backing yourself? Now, I've met a lot of cafe owners over the years, and some of them are thriving. Some are just scraping by, and honestly, some are right on the edge of shutting their doors. So today I want to break down what it actually takes to make a living from a cafe. Not just covering your costs, not just getting by, but running a business that actually pays you enough to make a decent living. Let's start with some benchmarks. If you've ever Googled cafe profit margins, you'll see numbers that say the average cafe runs on about 5 to 10% profit. Now, this is operating profit, or what your accountant might call EBIT on a profit and loss report. It's what's left after you've paid all the other expenses except tax and interest. Now, if you want to understand this a bit better, then I have another video I'll link at the end that might help. Now, the industry benchmarks are kind of useful as a rough guide, but here's the problem. Benchmarks reflect the average, and in this industry, average often just means getting by. They don't reflect what you actually need to make a good living, your mortgage, your goals, where you live. And for a typical cafe or coffee shop running at 5 to 10% profit, for a lot of people, financially they'd often be better off working for someone else. So if we put aside the averages, in terms of profit, cafes fall into one of three categories. First is the not sustainable cafe. Now, this is the tough one. The business is losing money, or the owner is basically working for free. Now, operating profit here is less than 5%. So on a cafe turning over $700,000 a year, that's less than $35,000 a year to pay yourself and cover any loans. Now, if it's a brand new business, then that's just often part of the early journey. But this should head in the right direction over time. And if not, then it's time to make some hard choices. Now, second is the cafe that's just getting by. And this is where I'd say the majority of established cafes sit. The bills are paid, the staff get their wages, and the owner takes home an income, but it's not really any better than having a regular job. Operating profit is usually around 5 to 10%. So on that same cafe turning over $700,000, you're looking at less than $70K a year for the owner. Now, for some people that's fine or great, but for others, when you add up the long hours, the stress and the risk, it often just doesn't feel worth it. And then finally, there are the thriving cafes. Now, these are the ones we all want to be. They're profitable, the owner is paid well, and they're often working less in the day-to-day. Now, operating profit here is in the 15 to 20% range, and that's around $150,000 in profit on that same 700K cafe. These cafes also usually have higher turnover than average. So for a cafe turning over $1 million, well, you get the gist. Now, that extra profit is not only good for right now, it's even better when it's time to sell. So now is a good time to point out there are actually two ways to make money from a cafe. The first is operating profit, and the second is resale. And the two of them are linked. It's like eating a cake and then selling the recipe. Let me explain. So far, we've been talking about operating profit, the money you make from running the business month to month. What's left over after all the bills are paid. But when it's time to move on to a new opportunity, the resale value is essentially someone else paying you for future profits. Now, people often assume that the value of a cafe or a coffee shop is determined by how busy or cool or, something else vibe related. But when you talk to business brokers, the biggest factor in resale price is a multiple of profit combined with how long is left on the lease. Now, that said, they're not the only factors. Buyers also look at turnover, location, fit out, equipment, and so on. But they don't add up to much if the business isn't profitable. So when we opened our own cafe, maximising resale was part of the plan from day one. We knew that we had to build a popular, profitable business model over the first 2 to 3 years, and then decide if we wanted to expand further or sell while we still had years left on the lease. Now, I know no one really wants to think about selling when they're in the planning stage of their dream, but it's worth planning for right from the very start. So to answer the question, can you really make a living from a cafe? Well, yes, but only if you build for it intentionally. And that means aiming higher than the average. I don't think it's worth settling for just getting by. Set your sights on higher to make the work and the risk worthwhile. So by now you're probably wondering, so what do the most successful cafes do differently? Well, it turns out I've made a separate video that dives into exactly that. It takes you through the 4 things that the best and the most profitable cafe owners I've ever met all have in common.